Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This is what the cover looks like. I was just looking for a fun standalone Scalzi read, so I checked this out of the library and now we're going to be talking about what I thought about this one. So we're going to discuss the plot and then we're going to discuss some thoughts about it, areas I thought this book was weak in, and things that I did enjoy about this book. The plot of The Kaiju Preservation Society. We opened the book with a woman named Jamie Gray who is working for a food delivery startup called Food Mood. She is meeting with her boss for her performance review and she gets laid off, which is a massive surprise because she seems to be doing quite well. And she's not only laid off which is annoying in any circumstance, she's laid off at the beginning of the pandemic. And so she has to actually move from being a marketing executive to a food delivery driver in order to maintain her income and keep paying rent in New York City. So we meet Jamie Gray in a rather difficult situation, and on some of her food delivery trips, she starts running into an old acquaintance named Tom. Tom eventually realizes that she's looking out of work, obviously she's delivering food, and he says, hey, I have an interesting job for you. It's kind of top secret, but we're looking for someone last minute to join a animal preservation sort of job. So Jamie decides she has nothing to lose. She goes and meets with the person and they offer her a great sum of money, and all she has to do is sign up to go on this, I think, 6-month excursion to do animal protection. They're rather cagey about what the animal protection is going to be, but Jamie thinks she has nothing to lose. There's money, she can pay rent, and life can go on. So what happens is this animal preservation is obviously the Kaiju Preservation Society, or KPS, and they have discovered that there is parallel worlds. So there are worlds that are parallel to Earth, and a way to get through is actually using nuclear explosions, nuclear energy, and this kind of creates a thinning of the veil so you can move between worlds. And in this other world there are kaiju which need protecting. So humans have not been in this other world. It's as though Earth developed on a different trajectory, and the Kaiju Preservation Society is interested in preserving and studying these creatures, but also very vested in working with governments around the world to make sure that we aren't setting off bombs or doing things, because when the veil thins, these creatures, these kaiju, can come over into Earth and cause a lot of problems. So it's kind of a scientific exploration adventure story that takes place in a parallel Earth. And unfortunately, after going on this mission and starting to work there, we come to learn that other people have different plans. Maybe people on Earth have their own ideas, even though this is not public knowledge. There are definitely high-level billionaires and people in government and military who have their own ideas on maybe what would be a good use for these kaiju on Earth, and have their own ideas about maybe messing with the kaiju in their natural habitat beyond scientific study and preservation, and are going to try to do other horrible things in response to the parallel Earth. So that's where I'm going to leave it, because I think the horrible things that happen you could read in the second half of the book and decide. Horrible is maybe kind of strong. The exciting adventure part in the second half of the book I'll leave up to you to read, but I'm going to talk about now what I thought about this book. And I have to be very honest, at the very beginning I was a little hesitant, so I want to say this right away. If you start reading this book and think, I don't really know about the premise, I think honestly the beginning was really weak. I started reading it and I wasn't sure if I was going to continue. I almost put this down about 10 or 15 pages in, thinking maybe this wasn't a plot for me, which I was very disappointed because I found that Scalzi really has interesting scenarios. I was talking to someone with this recently. I feel like the scenarios he creates are really, really interesting. And so I was like, why is this beginning so weak when normally his scenarios are so interesting? And I pushed through, and I think if you're reading this book, you should push through to like 50 or 100 pages, because it reads very, very fast, and the scenario, once we get into the parallel world, is really interesting and sucked me in and had me read the entire rest of the way through. But the beginning was really weak, and it felt very like stilted and artificial, and like I know the author was just trying to get us to the point where Jamie Gray signs up to go on this excursion, but it just felt weird and bizarre, and I did not like the beginning at all. I felt like it was really, really weak. But once we got into the alternate Earth, things started flowing and moving, and I felt like Scalzi was more in his groove, and I really enjoyed that. So if you are reading the beginning and think it's particularly weak, you are not alone. I felt like it was really weak too. Obviously, the comparison here is with Jurassic Park. There's a lot of similar vibes, but there are some differences. I do feel like I have not read the Michael Crichton book, Jurassic Park, but I have watched the movie, so I feel like there are comparisons. But this one, in and of itself, is just an interesting book. It doesn't feel immediately like a direct ripoff, and it feels like it has its own unique ideas. But anytime you have big monsters living in these jungle-like ancient times, you are going to invite that Jurassic Park comparison. And I truly feel like I can't speak on that comparison because I haven't read the Michael Crichton book, Jurassic Park, in and of itself to compare. So, although I have heard that it's actually a good book, so maybe I should read it. So, other things to know. I feel like I knew things were going to go south from the very beginning when we have this sentence on page 32. I wondered how long we would stay, and the answer was as long as it took for us to get off the plane, get collected by KPS staff, and shoved into a pair of what I was later told were cold, modified Chinook helicopters, which took off immediately and started heading inland. And that was my first indicator that something was going to go wrong later in the book, other than it's a fiction book, and we have, this blood-splattered badge, and it's implied things might go wrong. But anytime there's a helicopter, and tell me if this is just me, if there's a helicopter in a movie, I know at some point later in the movie, I'm going to see it going down in a trail of smoke. If I see a helicopter in a book, it's going to be a flaming pile of wreckage on the bottom of the ground, or the bottom of the floor, the forest floor, in about 200 pages. Is this an example of Chekhov's gun? Maybe not. But I feel like there's some similar comparison there, that every time there's a helicopter, the helicopter will be in great distress and then blow up in both movies and books, I find. That's just me. I feel like whenever I see one, I'm like, it's a helicopter, it's going down, and it always does. So when I saw that, I was like, that's going to wind up in a flaming pile on the bottom of the earth, isn't it? And I'll leave it up to you to determine what happens to the helicopters. So that was one indication that things were going to go wrong. But overall, the book was just kind of a fun romp. I actually thought, and sometimes I skip these sections, I'm kind of bad. In some ways I'm a bad reader, sometimes I skip introductions, and sometimes I skip the author's note and acknowledgements at the end. Maybe I should start reading them though. But for you, I recommend really reading this author's note at the end. I think it really clarifies this, because John Scalzi talks about how, and this is also an interesting note, he wrote this during, or a little bit after, the pandemic. So he was writing a rather serious book when 2020 started, and he kept being unable to write it due to kind of the seriousness of events around what was happening in 2020. And he felt like there was too much bad stuff basically going on in the world to write a very serious book. And so he kind of shifted focus, with permission of his editors and his team at wherever he publishes through, to write something that's more fun and fast paced. And I think it was the right move. And I think going in with that right mindset, this isn't maybe a serious book, but it's a fast paced, just fun book. And the author puts it clearly on page 262, where he says, as a writer, I feel grateful to this novel because writing it was restorative. KPS is not, and I say this with absolutely no slight intended, a brooding symphony of a novel. It's a pop song. It's meant to be light and catchy, with 3 minutes of hooks and choruses for you to sing along with, and then you're done and you go on with your day, hopefully with a smile on your face. I had fun writing this, and I needed to have fun writing this. We all needed a pop song from time to time, particularly after a stretch of darkness. So I think it's important to note the author isn't taking this too seriously, and I think you shouldn't either. The science isn't always ironed out in this book. I feel like there's loose ends that maybe could have been tied up, but the author is just writing a fun little adventure romp, and sometimes that's all you need. And I think going in with the right expectations of this book is really going to be key for enjoying it, and also skipping the beginning section. I want to end on a question that I would like you to answer in the comments if you feel inclined, which is, how do you feel about the pandemic being a plot point? I feel like maybe this is how people who are older than me think about when World War II or the Cold War are used as plot points in books, but I feel like there hasn't really been too many books I've read that include as a plot point historical events that occurred within my lifetime. And I think that's probably because I'm still quite young. I'm in my 20s. So maybe there hasn't been enough historical events that occurred in my lifetime to be used as plot points. But obviously people use World War II and the Cold War as plot points all the time as well, but I don't know if they would have during those times. So I think that's just interesting. And I tend to avoid, when I see that's going to be a plot point, I tend to avoid that because I don't know, it just feels, I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. This one, I know why the author used it. He was trying to create maybe a desperate person, or he was also processing his own things things he thought about when going through the pandemic, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. And maybe I'll feel differently in 20 years, but this is kind of the first time in my life I've been confronted with a historical thing that happened in my lifetime being used as a plot point in the book. And I've seen other books do that as well, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, and I think I'm just gonna have to get used to it, because I think the older I get, the more books that get written, the more are going to use that as a plot point. But it's definitely interesting, and it is definitely different, so by all means, think differently than this on me, but I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the comments of that down below. That's my review of the Kaiju Preservation Society. What did you think of this book? Leave those comments down below as well. If you have any suggestions or recommendations, I'm always taking those, so please put those in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.